Hello, I'm Andy and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to build a 4-foot by 10-foot shed and I'm going to do it on as little budget as possible. I end up spending a little under $400 total building it. If you'd like to see how I do it, please stick around. I start out by marking where I want my 4 footings to go. Once I have them marked out, I shovel a little bit of the dirt out, tamp down what's below it, and level a concrete block in its place. The first one's pretty easy, just got to make sure it's level. The next 3 get a little more difficult. I use a line level to try to get all 4 of them level with each other. Now that the footings are set, it's time to make the foundation. I use green treated 2x4s for the foundation to protect it from rot, and I place the center 2x4s 24 inches across on center. This is my first time ever using a pass load nailer. It's a huge time saver. I'm too cheap to purchase one. I'm lucky I had a friend that was nice enough to borrow it to me. And there, time to set the foundation down on the footings. When I set the foundation down on the footings, I'm going to use a level, and I'm going to make sure that it's level from right to left and then from front to back. I don't trust myself with a line level, and for good reason. I found that right to left, the left side was about 1.5 inches too tall. Front to back, though, was perfect. So, I ended up moving the foundation and lowering the left 2 footings an extra 1.5 inches. Now that I had the foundation level, it was time for the flooring. I used 3/4 inch OSB for this. I could have probably got by with thinner OSB. It was only a couple dollars more expensive from the thin stuff to this stuff. And being I had my supports 24 inches on center, I wanted to have it as sturdy as I could. Wanting to keep the budget as low as possible, I decided to build the framing using 2x2s instead of 2x4s. A 2x2 was about $1.50 a piece, and a 2x4 was just under $2 a piece. So by making my own 2x2s out of 2x4s, I save about 35%. On to building the walls. Through all of this framing, with everything you see me use the pass load nailer for, I'm using those 3-inch Hitachi nails in. I use 2 nails in each of these 2x2s. This is the back wall, so I'm going to sheet it before I put it up. It's the only way I'm ever going to get to it. A couple hundred more staples and the back sheeting will be on. Everywhere you see me use staples on this project, I'm using 1.25 inch narrow crown staples. I used somewhere between 22 and 2300 total. Now that the back is done, it's time to build the sides. I used the floor of the shed to build the sides on. It worked really well. I used a Sharpie. I put a couple marks on the floor so I knew where everything was supposed to line up at. I installed the top board long. I'll cut it off after. I made little gusset boards out of 3/8 inch plywood for the 2 corners. I could have probably figured out the length of that top board. A squared plus B squared equals C squared, all that kind of fun stuff, but who wants to do math when they can just use a handsaw? I'm better at a handsaw than I am at math. This will be the only time the back's ever going to be able to be painted. It's so close to the garage. So I put a coat of primer on the back. Then I thought, you know what, the floor could use a coat of primer while I'm at it. And then I put a coat of paint on the back after the primer had dried. With a little help from my wife, who was not thrilled to be on camera, I set the back wall up in place. Able to get it centered, and then nailed it down. Once I had 1 or 2 nails in there, I put a little brace on. Just kind of a temporary brace. It'll come off once the other walls are up. Then I put the 2 side walls up. To secure the sidewalls to the rear wall, I run 6 or 7 screws in that really make those two 2x2s back into a 2x4. Now I'm back on the driveway, building the front wall. And here you can see me installing those screws, just like I did on the rear wall. To give me an extra couple hands while installing the sheeting, I drive a couple nails about halfway into the foundation boards where I want the bottom of the sheeting to sit. That way I can set the sheeting on it, make sure it's square, and then staple it to the framework. Once again, I find it easier to use a handsaw than to measure, mark, and cut it beforehand. Now I'm back on the driveway, cutting the sheeting for the boards on the sides of the front door. For these small pieces of sheeting, I just drive one nail into the foundation board on each side, and then that'll hold up the sheeting, and then I can level it with the side and with the door opening, and then staple it on. Remembering to put new staples in the staple gun is something I sometimes can forget. Pass load quits firing when it runs out of nails. I did like that about it. It didn't let you shoot blanks. This would have been an easy enough measurement to take, but it's just something about using a handsaw is kind of fun. Wanting to build the shed as large as possible, I ended up with it a little bit larger than would allow me to nail down through the boards into the top of the rear wall because of the roof of the garage overhang. So I had to make a couple brackets here. I made these brackets out of some kind of a joist hanger type bracket, and then I bent some L brackets for below the boards. And then I used this pair of brackets to support the rear of the roof against the rear wall. And I also realized that the back 2x2 should have really been a 2 by about 2.5. But knowing how strong wood glue is once it sets, and every time I've tried to tear it apart, I tear the wood, not the wood glue, I'm not too concerned having to add this board. I use my air ratchet to install these brackets. It allows me to put a screw in from the back side and from the top where I otherwise wouldn't have room. And then I screw that bracket to the brace, and then I put the L bracket below with 4 more screws. And then for the front, I use a 6x6 that I cut brackets out of. And then the pass load nailer. Now it's time to install the roof, and it's really starting to look like a shed. I had one of these pieces slide off on me. Took a little chunk out of the piece, but I wasn't going to try to catch it. I installed the roof sheeting using the pass load nailer because of the wind loads that the roof will take versus the walls. And I didn't even trust just that. So then I went up there with about 3 dozen of these ring shank nails and threw 4 or 5 of them across each of the braces that were up there. Time to bring the table saw back into the backyard. It is really the best place to use it. And then I start cutting the trim for my shed. It's a lot less expensive, just like making 2x2s out of a 2x4 to make 1x4s out of a 2x4. That being said, if you have an older saw like I do and you do not have a riffing knife, be careful while using construction lumber like this. Sometimes it comes apart like this board did. Sometimes it pinches together and wants to push back at you. Then I install these boards with the stapler, but I don't trust the stapler in and of itself. So I use these 3-inch finish nails, and I think I put 5 of them in like each end, and there's probably a dozen across the front, 5, 6 down each side. And in essence, pulling it all together and making everything stronger. The rear trim board was a little over 8 feet long, so I needed to use 2 boards. So what I did was I cut a chamfer on the board and installed it with it angled downwards. So when rainwater runs down that board, it'll stay out of there. It won't run back behind it. I decided that a board and batten design would really break up the look of the OSB on the sides. So I was able to cut 7 batten boards out of each 2x4. So it took 2 2x4s to make all the battens. Like most of the time when I hurt myself, it's not when I'm doing something that's actually dangerous. It's when I'm doing something mundane like putting new staples in the stapler, and the edges of the staple cut my thumb open like it was a serrated knife. Go out in the sunlight to show it to you a little bit better. That's what super glue is for. I super glued myself up and got back to work. This is a 2x6 here, and this will be the framework for around the door. I'm turning the 2x6 into a 1x6 essentially, or 2 1x6s. Another way I was able to keep costs down was using a 4x4 out of a pallet for the braces along the roof. I cut it down so it's more like a 3x4. I install the braces by holding them with a clamp, making sure they're square with my little framing square here, and then toenailing them into the lower brace or the front wall bracing with some 3-inch screws. And then I go up onto the roof and I put 6 or 7 nails into them. And these should help so that the OSB siding doesn't curl over in time on the overhang. I knew when I was installing my roof sheeting that it was not going on exactly square. I had about an inch more overhang on this side than I did the other. So to combat that, I went underneath and I put 2 screws up 18 inches out from the front of the roof. And then I put a chalk line across there and snapped the chalk line. And then I called it quits for the night. Well, the next day it had rained that night, so the next day I had to use a Sharpie, darken my line, and then I cut the front of the porch roof off. Now it's time to prime and paint. I went with 2 coats of primer on the complete shed before I started painting it. Primer is about half the price of paint, and I find that it makes the paint go a lot longer. Then I used a white trim paint and painted all the trim white. I did 2 coats of the white trim paint. One coat there was just a couple spots was a little bit light. And I really don't want to have to do this again. So then I did 2 coats of brown on the main part of the shed. I just under a gallon. I got enough brown for just a couple of touch-ups left. Used almost a full gallon. And it's done. Aside from the doors. I'm real happy with the way it turned out. I think it looks nice for what I have into it. Thank you for watching.